go ahead and get started. For those of you who are able to make it here tonight, you probably pulled in and saw the prison buses and didn't know it was happening. There's an event down on the track. It seems like maybe a local area high school track competition. So the activity buses parked sideways in our parking spaces. So for those of you who are out there circling University Heights, hopefully you can watch this on your phone. And for those of you who decided to stay home and watch it, you might have made the right decision if you did not get here very, very early. But it is a pleasure to see this many of you out there in the audience. I'm really excited that you're all here. Tom Herron is here tonight. He gave our presentation last month about, about Thomas Wolfe and his relationship with the city of Asheville and kind of a biographical walkthrough of our author of this semester's selection. Tonight we have a really cool behind-the-scenes peek at the Thomas Wolfe Memorial, and I'll say a little bit more about that in just a moment. But our final event of the semester is going to happen Wednesday, April 23rd. It'll be here at 7 p.m. It's by some yokel named Wiley Cash, and he'll talk about some scenes in Look Homeward Angel. Thomas Wolfe is known as an author. David Worley and I were just talking about the power of his language to do things that seem very magical. And when I think of Thomas Wolfe, quotes involving magic, making magic in a dusty world, the magical campus of UNC Chapel Hill, as close to magic as he ever came. Magic looms very large in mind when I think of him and his work. But as a writer, I can tell you there's no magic at all. It's all just tricks. Writing fiction is the ability to manipulate your reader into believing and experiencing things that are not true. And so at the end of our time together of this semester, I'll show you how the magic works by breaking down some scenes in Look Homeward Angel to show you how craft elements like characterization and setting and theme and tone and dialogue work as building blocks to construct these spaces that writers allow readers to inhabit, these magical spaces that readers step into. But tonight, we have Kayla C., who is the site director at the Thomas Wolfe Memorial, and she is going to talk to us for just a little bit. Kayla's been at the memorial since 2016, right? Full-time since 2023, or director since 2023. She is a native of the region, which is wonderful. But what's interesting, they say you can't go home again. Well, she did. And she returned to the Thomas Wolfe Memorial after doing an internship there in 2012. And then she bounced around at a lot of other places, a lot of other historical sites. But I'm thrilled that she's at the Wolfe Memorial. She's been so much nicer to me than she ever had to be. A couple of years ago, I was working on a Wolfe essay for a travel guide, and I went to her. I just showed up one day and I said, I've got this crazy idea. What if I wrote the essay in the house? What if I wrote the first draft inside the house, like in Ben's room? She was like, it's unlocked if you want to go in there. I was like, are you serious? And before she could think better of it, I kind of backed out of the office and just went in there and wrote my essay. But I'm really excited that you're here, Kayla, so I will turn it over to you.
Thanks for having me. He seems trustworthy, right?
I've got a trunk full of artifacts.
Right. So I'm going to stand right about here, I think is the sweet spot for the cameras. But so as Molly said, my name is Kayla. I'm the site director at the Thomas Wolfe Memorial. It is a really unique pleasure and a unique thing to have a job at the Thomas Wolfe Memorial because I come at this from the history aspect. I think a lot of folks come at it from the literary aspect, but I had to do that after the fact. If you've ever wondered if you have to read Thomas Wolfe to work at the memorial, you bet. Yeah, that's definitely one of our biggest requirements. So in 2012, when I was an intern, I've got to keep scooting, okay. When I was an intern, I read Lacombe Angel, and I thought, this is no big deal. I read books in graduate school all the time. And about 50 pages in, I thought, oh my God, I'm not going to make it. But of course, I persevered. I did, in fact, make it. And look at me now, right? So I thought it would be fun, per Wiley's suggestion too, to share just some behind-the-scenes stuff that we do, because, you know, we have a really also unique history as a museum. Not a lot of historic sites can boast that they went directly from family ownership to museum status. And with that affords wonderful opportunities for interpretation, as well as what we actually have on display inside the historic house, if you've ever had a chance to visit us. But before we dive a little deeper into that, I wanted to provide some context on just the history of the land. So obviously first, the lands encompassing downtown Asheville would have been part of the Cherokee Nation. But if you flash forward to 1794, a man named John Burton received a significant amount, about 200 acres of land in what is now downtown, known as the original town tract. And that's a really, really rough boundary of the blue rectangle that you see there. But that was part of the original town tract. And then you flash forward a few more years into the 1800s, and John McConnell Smith, if you're familiar with him, he's often known as the first white man born west of the Blue Ridge Mountains. He married a Mary, also known as Polly Patton, so the Patton family comes into play here. And they owned a majority of that land downtown. McConnell Smith also opened what was known as one of the first hotels, really, known as the Buck Hotel, which would be roughly where the AC Hotel stands today, if you're familiar with that downtown. So a prominent area, a lot of prominent people in our past. Now, by 1881, a man named Irwin Sluter, a local banker in downtown Asheville, had purchased that plot of land on what is now, or once was known as 48 Spruce Street. Irwin Sluter decided to build a house on that land, and he never lived in it. It was meant to be a wedding gift for his daughter, Cornelia, who would become Bernard, was her married name. And they lived in a quaint 7-room Queen Anne Victorian home. So the first floor would have consisted of the first 4 rooms. That front room, identified as a bedroom, would have also been used as a secondary parlor, as a lot of older Victorian homes had 2 parlors. And then on the second floor, we have the top 3 bedrooms. So just 7 rooms in total, and that's what a lot of the homes on Spruce Street originally looked like. Flash forward in time a few more years. By the early 1890s, it had undergone pretty significant expansions. It went from 7 rooms to 18. And in the early 1890s, a woman named Alice Reynolds purchased it, and she's who we see first operating it as a boarding house. It shows up in city directories, local travel information, and a lot of local literature and pamphlets. Is anybody here familiar with the Sanborn fire insurance maps? I have a few clips from them. They are wonderful digitized maps. Asheville's digitized maps go back to 1881, and they provide a beautiful bird's eye view of what neighborhoods once looked like. So you see I have the house circled in purple on that bottom map, and that's Spruce Street that runs along to the right. Now, College Street's the bottom street, and you've got Woodfin and North Main, which is now, of course, Broadway. Walnut and Market Street did not exist yet, and those came in later. But to zoom in, it's even listed on the fire insurance map as the Reynolds at that point, so that's pretty cool. And this is one of my favorite images. It's from 1913, so a little forward in time, but it shows you a bird's eye view of our neighborhood. It would be as if you were standing on the roof of the AC Hotel today, which at that point was the Langren. So it's looking northeast over the house. You can always find us in historical photos based on our roof pattern. We have that really distinct kind of fish scale floral pattern. So in 1913, the house is actually not yellow, it was white. And then, it's hard to see, but kind of directly middle, there's a small white house with a brown roof, and you see 4 distinct columns. It's quite tiny. But that was the Wolf family home. And if you're familiar with downtown, that was where the parking lot of the YMCA is today. Torn down in 55. And then other notable highlights would be at the top of the hill there by 1913. That, of course, is the Grove Park Inn. And then the big building here on the left is Orange Street School. That was the primary school that all the children attended. Now, Julia Wolf, we have to talk about Julia. She's instrumental to the whole thing. Julia was born in Swannanoa in 1860, so just on the outskirts of Asheville. And some of her first memories were of the Civil War, post-war poverty. And that really instilled in her a very intense preoccupation with money and success. She was one of a few children, several of which died young, and her brothers all ended up being quite successful in local real estate, in construction, in timber, and she was not to be outdone. So one of my favorite things about Julia is, as a young woman, early 20s in the 1880s she, with the help of her father, purchased a small plot of land off of Chestnut Street. It would be where Fuddruckers was, if you're familiar with that location. And she built a house for herself. So again, she's in her early 20s. She thinks that for all intents and purposes, she's probably going to be a spinster, right? She's not married yet, she said. So she builds the house. But then a few short years later, she meets and marries William Oliver Wolf, Thomas's father. And when they marry, she decides to sell the house that she had built. She actually split that plot of land into two, a vacant lot and then the one that contained the house, and made a decent amount of profit off of it. And that really instilled in her a lifelong love of real estate and of land speculation. I'll cut to the chase and tell you that her name shows up on over 200 deeds in Buncombe County alone, where she bought and sold land over the years, due large in part to just smart investing, as well as profits that came in off of the boarding house. But one of my favorite quotes about Dixieland, because it also encompasses that animosity, that bitterness that you can tell Thomas had while he's writing Look Homeward Angel. That was such an outlet, for him to vent his frustrations. He said, "Thus she began to think of Dixieland. It was situated 5 minutes from the public square on a pleasant, sloping, middle-class street of small homes and boarding houses. Dixieland was a big, cheaply constructed frame house of 18 or 20 drafty, high-ceiling rooms. It had a rambling, unplanned, gabular appearance and was painted a dirty yellow. It had a pleasant green front yard, not deep but wide, bordered by a row of young, deep-bodied maples. There was a sloping depth of 190 feet, a frontage of 120, and Eliza, looking toward the town, said, 'That'll put a street behind there someday.'" Now, a top photo is what the house looked like when she bought it in 1906. That photo's from 1908. I love that it has the family in it. Actually, Tom's sitting on kind of the front stoop, if you will, here with his legs crossed. You've got W on the yard with his legs crossed, sitting in a lawn chair. Looks like Julia's up on the porch and various sisters scattered around. Now, Julia made her own changes to the house. Remember, this is a woman who wants to keep up with the times. She wants to cash in and make money on the tourism industry. So by 1916, 10 years into owning and running this, Julia, actually oversaw the addition of 11 more rooms to the house. So today, let me back it up. We have 29 rooms in total. The house, it's misleading if you've been there. It doesn't quite look it from the outside, but we're a little over 6,000 square feet. We have 3.5 bathrooms, 18 proper bedrooms, shared spaces, and she could have up to 40 boarders, by the way, just to kind of break that down. So it was a huge old packed house. Now, one reason why boarding houses were so successful had a lot to do with just the broader growth in the region. I don't think I have to tell you how important tourism is here in Asheville, right? And the railroad really ramped that up. Prior to the railroad arriving in 1880, October 3rd, 1880 is actually when the train pulled into town. There were very few proper roads. It was very hazardous to get here. So we had a small, budding reputation as a healthful destination, but it took a lot of money to make your way up here from the coast in the deep south. And then the railroad let everybody come. It was affordable, it was easy, and people figured out we really do have some lovely summer temperatures compared to other portions of the south. So not only do people want to travel through here, they want to spend extended amounts of time here in Asheville. And while we had a fair share of resorts, a lot of hotels kind of cropping up in the 1890s through the turn of the century, boarding houses were better for your everyday traveler, and they were more affordable as well. So we have a shot of the railroad coming in. And then, of course, one of the big hotels, the Battery Park Hotel, the original one at the time. And then the other big reason for our tourism, health tourism. Asheville was getting a really robust reputation as having good climate, good healthy mountain air. And doctors at the time, without kind of understanding or didn't have the knowledge yet about bacteria and antibiotics, they looked to the environment and to the climate for the cure. And is anybody here familiar with Dr. Von Ruck? Yeah, so he moved to Asheville in the 1880s and developed Winyah Sanitarium, which was just below Sunset Mountain, and basically he pioneered a lot of the modern theories about tubercular treatment of the day. And I love these shots side by side because it shows in 20 years how drastically different Pack Square looks. You go from the top corner, what it looked like in the 1880s, by 1890, and then, of course, by 1900. Now, that middle photo that's taken from an old postcard, what really stands out to me are your power lines. Right, so Asheville, very progressive with amenities. Asheville had started developing an electric trolley system by the 1880s. It was up and running by the late 1880s. And then we also, very early on with city water, city sewer, clean street initiatives, right? We're really leaning into the healthy environment here. And then, for those of you that know, Tom's father, William Oliver Wolf, was a stonecutter, and he had his shop on the northeast side of the square. So just kind of out of our view in this shot, but that was the front facade. Now, W was from Pennsylvania. He moved south after the Civil War and settled here in Asheville by the 1870s. And as a stonecutter, was a decent local businessman with his shop. We just like to joke that Julia felt people in Asheville weren't dying fast enough, guys. Not enough revenue coming in from his business to suit her. Now, we also know, of course, when Julia bought the boarding house, she is thinking ahead for her future. When she married W.O. in 1885, they would go on to have 8 children. She had their first 7 children in 9 years. And then there was a 6-year gap before Thomas was born in 1900 as the baby of the family. So by the time Julia is thinking about her next steps in life and kind of playing up her savvy entrepreneurial spirit, she realizes most of her children are older and self-sufficient. She can afford the time it would take to bring in money by running a boarding house. Thomas gets caught in the crosshairs, though, because, as we know, as the baby, he was the only one of his brothers and sisters that actually lived in the boarding house in a full-time capacity while Julia ran it. So she and Thomas lived there full-time while his father and some of his older siblings continued to live the couple blocks over in their other house. And they were gossiped about around town, people kind of speculating what's going on in the Wolf family, this, again, split household. And Thomas felt like he was getting cheated, out of a normal childhood. He felt like he had gotten the short end of the stick because his siblings are doing their normal thing, and he's over here stuck with all these strangers, these people coming and going that he didn't know. And what better thing to set you up to write a novel, right? So in his 20s, after traveling around and finishing graduate school at Harvard, he starts writing Look Homeward, Angel. I think you guys are a little familiar with that one by now, yeah? Yeah. Now, people here in Asheville, not too happy about it. Originally thrilled to see a local boy do good until they read the book and figured out it was about them, right? He used everybody he had ever known as characters. Family, friends, neighbors, many of the boarders. No one was spared, and he barely changed names. And he liked to air out his fair share of dirty laundry about everybody, and that certainly did him no favors either. So, per Maxwell Perkins, his editor's kind of encouragement, Wolf came home before the novel came out just to kind of give his family a courtesy heads up. He basically said, they're telling me this could ruffle some feathers. I don't really get it, but I just wanted to let you know. And then he went back to New York City while Julia was left dealing with the fallout of it all. I like to think of Wolf as in self-imposed exile for almost 8 years. Now, Wolfe had his fair share of relationships and flings, one more significant one with an older woman named Aline Bernstein, but he never married. I always think of him as married truly to writing and traveling. Those were his two passions in life. That's what he spent his time on. That's what he prioritized. In a very short amount of time, and what ended up being just about not quite 15 years, he went to Europe 7 times. Traveling abroad in the late 20s and 30s was quite the feat. It took a lot of money, too. And he wrote prolifically. Now, Wolfe, aside from Look Homeward Angel, wrote a follow-up novel that was published 5 years later called Of Time in the River. Picks up with a lot of the same characters as Look Homeward Angel and is a different snippet of his life. If you haven't figured it out, everything he did was deeply autobiographical, right? And he also has a whole bunch of short stories that we love. And that was Wolfe's way of making money in the in-between. He had a tendency to blow through his book advances. And he would, even as an adult, doing well, still sometimes write home to Julia and ask for the occasional check. Now, Wolfe died shortly after taking a huge trip out west. 2 of my favorite photos from that trip are our top 2. He's at Salt Lake City, and then there he is in Yosemite feeding a chipmunk. Yeah. But he passed away in 1938 from tubercular meningitis. Now, it's worth noting, because of, I think, his tragic and untimely death, that even after the novel was published, people had started to make their way to the old Kentucky home, right? They wanted to see Dixieland in person. Sorry, thanks. And so Julia kind of hosted her fair share of his fans over the years. People came wanting to talk to her as if she was a character from the novel. Locals, in their anger, had asked her, how do you feel about your portrayal in the novel as Eliza? You know, he really kind of sticks it to the mother, right? And she was in denial about it. She said, remember, folks, this is fiction, okay? But in later years, I think it got to her, and she confronted Thomas in a letter where she said that she felt Eliza was he had told her that he wrote Eliza as a very strong, resourceful, and courageous woman who showed great character and determination in her struggle against the odds of life. That's the way I certainly feel and felt about it. And since I wrote the book, my opinion ought to be as good as anyone's. And I don't think she really ever questioned it after that. If anything, I would argue she leaned even more heavily into the persona of Eliza and catering to his fans, especially after he passed. So I think of her not only as the owner and the proprietress of Dixieland, she was also a proud mother. And if I'm being honest, she's the memorial's first curator. She really set a precedent that would let us, I think especially her surviving children, Tom's siblings, feel that it was okay to let the house remain as a shrine of sorts to their brother, rather than to sell it off or, kind of split inheritance, as sometimes things can get messy in large families. I just put this in here. One of my favorite clips is where she kind of subtly takes a little bit of the glory, saying, of course he was brilliant. I gave birth to him, okay? And of course, the iconic shot of his last visit home of the 2 of them on the steps of the boarding house together. So becoming the Thomas Wolfe Memorial, as I mentioned when we first got started, it was actually quite a smooth transition. We went directly from family ownership to that museum status. Even before Julia passed away in 1945, by the way, she was 85 years old, and it's worth noting she was still running the place in some capacity up until that point. Her oldest son, Frank, had been living with her. They kind of helped each other out. Frank was in poor health as well. So when Julia passed away, Frank continued to live there kind of as caretaker of the property while he and the surviving siblings, there were 4 of them left at that point, well, they kind of got their ducks in a row, figured out which way the future was going to look for the memorial. Officially, just 4 years later, on July 19th in 1949, Tom's sister, Mabel Wolfe Wheaton, that's her right there in the front, handed over the keys to the newly formed Thomas Wolfe Memorial Association, a nonprofit that was created to run the boarding house as a proper museum. Then, in 1958, the Old Kentucky home passed ownership to the city of Asheville. The city of Asheville had been helping with a lot of costs prior to that, so it made sense that they kind of wanted that backbone, that extra support. And in similar fashion, just a few short years later, in 1975, the state of North Carolina took ownership of the house. At that time, the North Carolina Department of what was then just the Cultural Resources had started an umbrella under them for historic sites. And today, we are one of 28 state-owned historic sites here in North Carolina. So there's a shot from the 1949 Asheville Citizens. And then that is Tom's older brother, Fred, speaking at a plaque ceremony. The house was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1971. And when it got its plaque in 1973, Fred spoke. He was the last living of the immediate Wolf family. Fred was born in 1892, and he passed away in 1980. So Fred was the only one to see the memorial through all of its transitions, which I think is pretty cool. So let's talk a little bit about behind-the-scenes interpretation and how that's changed over the years. Pre-1997, the house was packed. It was full of collected bits and pieces of ephemera, things that Julia had put up on the walls from fans, things that had belonged to Thomas, along with other things from his siblings. And many rooms contained furnishings and belongings that belonged to the Wolf family in some capacity, but didn't actually belong in the historic house itself. So good examples of that were furnishings from Thomas Wolfe's apartments in New York City that were saved and preserved, or even pieces in a chase lounge, a safe, a desk, tools from his father's stone cutting shop, which we're grateful to have, but didn't really belong in the house. At that point, you could walk through. Sometimes Fred Wolf would guide you through, depending on what day of the week you showed up to take a tour. They had baby clothes and baby photos of Thomas laid out. That's Mabel and her husband Ralph reading excerpts in the dining room of the boarding house in the 50s. Here's a front room, would have been a boarder's bedroom, filled with more of Thomas's belongings from his apartments in New York City. It's worth noting the typewriter you see there, didn't use it. That's a fun little trivia bit. Not a lot of people realize he had 2 typewriters in his life, hated them both, never felt like he could do the typewriter justice, said his hands were too big. So he wrote everything out longhand with a pencil on a legal pad and then ferociously dictated to his poor literary agents and typists at Simon & Schuster, or Scribner's at the time. And more from his father's stone cutting shop. Now, in 1997, a lot of that changed. That's when the current visitor center was built, just behind the boarding house. Our address for the visitor center is 52 North Market Street, if you're familiar with that street downtown. And in the visitor center, we were able to pull the things out of the house that belonged to us but didn't belong there and give them a better platform for interpretation and for viewing. And so our visitor center building is a really unique space. It's a lot of fun. You walk in, we have a huge open lobby with family crests, state flag, historic sites flag. That open space is where we gather our tours together. We have an open space and a window for our pop-up exhibits that we like to do. And then we have permanent artwork installed down each side of the visitor center walls. Has anybody ever been there and seen that in person? It's beautiful. It was done by local artist Connie Bostic. Each panel represents a different scene or quote from Wolfe's writings. She had like a quilt pattern in mind, so it adds a lot of color to the room. And then we have our auditorium space. I'll actually talk about more about this in just a second. So something we wanted to do was to provide context on Wolfe's life and career, because you may find this hard to believe, but some people come in and have no idea who Wolfe is. And we're trying to get them as educated as quickly as possible. So we have a short 20-minute film that we show on the life and career of Thomas Wolfe in there for our patrons. And then the exhibits. One of my favorite things that we have, too, is right when you walk in, a wall of quotes. Some a bit snarky, actually, some backhanded compliments, and some quite nice. But the exhibit hall winds you through in a circle so that you can look at furnishings from the other house, the Wolfe family home. We have a designated area just for his father's stone cutting shop. And we also have 2 sections just for Wolfe's belongings. That's where you'll find a sofa bed, actual pajamas. We rotate through 2 suits that he wore, a brown suit and a nicer tuxedo and a beautiful Burberry jacket. And if that ever goes missing after I'm gone, please don't come looking. And then we have other little everyday items that he used, cups, saucers. It really adds a personal, tangible aspect to this man that we tend to talk about all the time, things that you read about him, but it's different when you see the teacup that he drank out of every day. And I often think of us as a rare gem because how awesome is it to walk through the house, the childhood home of someone famous, but you're also going to be walking through the actual pages of Lacombe Angel when you go through. So a glimpse inside today, I'm sharing with you privileged information here with these photos. Just kidding. We have our beautiful entryway. So you can see too, by moving some stuff out of the house into the exhibits and the visitor center, it frees it up to look as it would have. How we have it set up today, based on detailed furniture inventory from Julia Wolf herself, coupled with how Thomas wrote about things and his siblings that were there helping, it's very accurate, actually. So we have the dining room, of course, and the kitchen. One of my favorite spaces. I say favorite a lot. I have a lot of favorites. You'll have to forgive me. It comes with the territory. But the kitchen, you can just envision. Anytime Thomas is writing in Lacombe Angel about Eliza standing in the kitchen in the wee hours of the morning, prepping something for the next day, that is literally where she was standing. And her bedroom, tacked right off the edge of the kitchen. She added that on for herself when she did her additions in the 19-teens, because if she took up a regular sized bedroom, she'd be cut into her profit margins, right? And we simply cannot have that. And for me, that room is like a time capsule. It is filled with truly her personal effects. We've got everything in there from her shoes, her chamber pot, a hat, a dress, purse, fan, gloves, medicine bottles, still filled with sticky, icky fluids, and a whole bundle of house keys, various banknotes and real estate papers, guest ledgers to the house, telling us all the boarders that came through over the years. And it's worth noting, too, talking about her additions, as I did just a moment ago, they're actually quite nice. But in the novel, Thomas, of course, says the construction was after her own plans and of the cheapest material. It never lost the smell of raw wood, cheap varnish, and flimsy rough plastering, but she had added 8 or 10 rooms. Of course, she did actually end up adding on 11. And one of my, I won't say favorite, one of the better rooms in the house for sunlight, how about that, is our sun parlor. And that really is speaking so broadly to Asheville's image for convalescing. You didn't have to be one of the sick houses or one of the sanitariums, right, to still want to come and convalesce in that mountain air. As a matter of fact, I flashed by it briefly earlier. On her business cards, did anybody notice that she put on there, no sick people? I know, pretty blunt advertising, right? And then above that, we have our sleeping porch, one of 2 sleeping porches for the same reason, for folks that wanted to come and be within that mountain air and that good sunlight. And then this is just a random back bedroom that you'd have the pleasure of being by one of the few bathrooms. Now, whether that's a blessing or a curse, you'll have to make your choice there. And our floor plans. So this is something that tends to kind of blow people away when you lay it all down color-coded like this. But this is the first floor. So green goes back to the 1883 house I showed at the beginning. Blue is what it looked like by the early 1890s and when she bought it in 1906. And everything in red are her additions. That's the second story. So she did some damage upstairs, right? And if you walk through the house, and we have some tour guides here with us tonight, it rambles in places. Sometimes you walk through someone else's room to get where you need to go, either because you have to, or it's just the path of least resistance. But that's kind of what makes it fun. Now, in the last just kind of few minutes, while I've got it, I'm going to set this down. I don't need it. It's not all been peachy keen at the memorial. We've had 2 pretty significant disasters, one more recent than the other, but the big one, the one that was hard to come back from, was a fire in 1998. Is everybody familiar with our arson fire at Wolf? Yeah. So this is just a super quick video. I'm not going to play all of it, but this ran a few years back.
14 years ago today, downtown Asheville almost lost a landmark.
On July 24th, 1998, someone tried to burn down the Thomas Wolf house, and News 13's Karen Wynn spent the day at the home.
Karen, if I remember correctly, the arsonist was never caught.
No, Darcel, that remains a mystery all these years later, but workers at the Thomas Wolf home say it's a bit of history that makes the old house even more intriguing today.
You better get downtown. The Wolf House is on fire.
It was the phone call Chris Morton never wanted to get, and when he arrived on the scene in 1998, things got worse.
When I went around to the front of the house, I saw then the fire gushing from what was by then the collapsed roof.
But ironically, some say the age and the structure of the home saved itself.
So once it burnt through the plaster walls, the inside space acted as a chimney, and it caused the fire to burn up instead of out, which is what allowed us to keep so much of the original furnishings.
The home closed for 6 years after.
I'll skip past that. But if you could glean from that, I just think the footage of the fire is so jarring, right, to see. But as Christian Edwards, one of our former site managers at Wolf's, described it, as the fire marshal kind of explained to us, the nature of the old plaster walls and insulation here, lack of insulation there, the fire spread up from where it started in the dining room, did pretty significant damage to the bedroom above it, but then spread across the roof line. So while most interior rooms were left smoke damaged or then water damaged, they could be refurbished. Furniture could be salvaged. It wasn't a total loss. We all the time at the memorial kind of combat the reputation or the rumor that we burnt into the ground, right? And I kind of get really defensive. I'm like, actually, less than 20% of the structure was damaged. But it was significant. We stationed triage in our visitor center for paper goods, things that needed drying out while people worked in the house. We salvaged things, pulling them out, setting up tarps and triaged areas in the backyard for everything that we could. And we quickly established relationships. That's that front bedroom that originally had Wolf's typewriter in it I showed you, just for perspective. Now, Biltmore Estate did a lot of conservation work for us. And I think of this as a silver lining. Before the fire, what was known as Julia's birthing bed was painted kind of an off gray, kind of a putty color. And it did have the floral medallion on it, so that's how we could identify it. After the fire, this was above the dining room, so it took a brunt of the damage. As they were restoring it and kind of getting the char off, they found the floral pattern, the beautiful blue paint hiding underneath. So they were able to shore up the bed, make us a new footboard, and restore the paint back to how we know it originally looked, something that had been unknown to us. So you're always kind of looking for the silver linings in these things. And then to end here, Hurricane Helene was not kind to us. It was not kind to many, and we fared far better than others in the community. But our historic maple tree, a silver maple that had been on the property since the 1880s, 1890s, fell against the house. So it was the last what we call witness tree to the property of the Wolf family. As you can see, and I say this a lot, it's almost as if the tree just delicately fainted, like it just simply could not hold on any longer, and it did fall against the house. While it did do some roof damage, and we're in the processes of coordinating some of the repairs, the tree was on the house for about a month before we could get it removed, understandably, with all the other trees down in the area. But about a month to the day after the hurricane came through, the tree was removed. And we are not sure what we're going to plant back there, but what we did do was have them preserve a cross-cut section of the trunk so that we can do ring dating. We want to have that preserved. They're going to make us a display, so that'll be part of our lobby, a kind of a pop-up exhibit we'll have. And we also kept some wood. We're thinking about what to do for little mementos for that as well. But that was taken from one of the upper floors in the Renaissance, which was really jarring to see as well. And then very quickly, these wonderful men, Tom Heron was there, he can attest to it, it looked like a PlayStation controller, y'all, I'm not even gonna lie. They came in, they took it down, it was wonderful. And here we are, that was just this morning, actually. I realized I don't have a lot of exterior photos without the tree, so I thought I'd go grab one. Now, currently at the memorial, first of all, come see us, right? Something that's kind of a passion project for me is expanding community outreach and bolstering our programming here. Of course, we exist for Thomas Wolfe. We are clearly fans of Thomas Wolfe. We love him. But it's important that we, try to get folks that say, oh, I went to the house in the 90s. I don't really care to come back. We want to give them new reasons to come and visit. We were afforded some wonderful opportunity through the Preservation Society with grant money, so we're actually currently upgrading some of the AV equipment that you saw in our auditorium space so that we can offer hybrid events and discussions so folks can attend through Zoom or come in person. That corresponds really well with our student writing competition that we do every fall in that ceremony. We also have done two, we aspire to do more, film screenings. We are working on another pop-up exhibit featuring some of Julia Wolf's clothing. We're very excited about that. And various readers' theaters, teachers' workshops. We have a teachers' workshop scheduled for July, and social media series. And then more importantly, coming up really quickly, we have a mural that's going to be installed on Saturday, April 26th, a beautiful mural on the exterior of the visitor center. So check our social media, but we'll provide more information on that. We hope you can make it. And then just a little shout out to Jude Law here, who came to the memorial back in 2014 for research before he was in the movie Genius. So if Jude Law's coming, everybody else should too. Well, thank you guys. I think I'm just a skosh over on my time, but I figure if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Kayla, that was fascinating. And those old pictures and the old maps, it's so interesting, stuff I never would have seen otherwise. As someone who's there every day,
Yeah.
Can you just give us maybe a little story about something that has surprised you that you've come across in the house or in the archives, or something that's really endeared you to the family or to Tom?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. For those that have taken my tour or talked to me daily when I'm doing research, know that I'm a little heavy on Julia. I really admire what she did, and I give her a lot of credit because without her, we really wouldn't have any of it. And something I've come to realize is, even though Thomas is a little harsh with his mother in the novel, in real life, he was much more tenderhearted. I think as an adult, he gained that needed perspective by traveling that showed him all his mother had sacrificed on his behalf. And I think it says a lot, too, that she also, maybe seeming like a denial, not really a nostalgic person. She wasn't like a cuddly, a nurturing kind of individual it comes across. But to have in our archive everything she saved that her kids gave her. Handwritten cards. I mean, she's a mom, you guys. That's something that I always have to remember. She was maybe first and foremost describing herself as a businesswoman, but she has locks of hair from her babies. She has, again, Mother's Day cards, Christmas cards. Every letter that Thomas wrote her, she saved. And I think that says a lot. That really put a different perspective on her for me.
Where do y'all store everything?
Yeah, so we store all of our stuff. It kind of split in different places. So we actually have a lot of storage on site. We use some of the back rooms in the house for a lot of our storage that don't meet fire code for tour giving. So we're able to maximize storage there. We also, if you're familiar, Pack Library, Buncombe County Special Collections, they have the Thomas Wolfe collection there. So they house a lot of things that were given by the family in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on. We also have a good relationship with Chapel Hill. One of the Thomas Wolfe Special Collections is in their library. And then there is a collection at Harvard as well. So it's a little scattered, but we are afforded copies of things. People are very nice to us when we reach out and ask for things, so that helps too.
You talk a little about Julia's later life and her financial problems that she encountered.
Yeah, so Julia's later life, her financial problems. The depression, not kind to her, not kind to a lot of people, especially here in Asheville. But for a woman who was so deeply tied to the tourism industry, coupled with her love of real estate, buying and selling land, those are two things you really don't want when the economy tanks, right? And she had both of them. So in the 20s, especially into the 30s, she's struggling. She lost some pieces of land back to the bank. She defaulted on payments. At one point, she actually lost the boarding house. But her neighbor, Harry Bloomberg, if you guys know local Harry Bloomberg, he actually bought it from the bank, allowed Julia to live there, and the family, the children, they helped her make payments so that she could continue to live there, and they bought it back from him. So she never left. There was a little bit of a hiccup then in the ownership of the old Kentucky home, but when she passed, the house was in her name. And it is sad because in addition to a lot of the real estate and various business ventures that she had here in Western North Carolina, she also spent a majority of the winters in the 19-teens down in Florida, buying and selling land in Miami, Daytona, around Palm Beach. She was kind of getting in on a lot of the front end of some of those land booms. And she made a lot of money, lost a lot of money too doing that. So when Julia died in 1945, something that had helped her tremendously was inheriting Thomas's literary estate. Since he had never married, she did inherit everything. And while he wasn't necessarily the wealthiest, revenue, royalties was still, they were coming in, and that was very helpful. And I think too, she enjoyed traveling. She constantly did kind of give interviews and promote him, and she got some money from doing those things as well. So when she died, I think of her as still having some good assets under her belt, but she was pretty cash poor for all intents and purposes, unfortunately, which is a shame when you think about someone born in 1860 specifically, living to 1945. What a unique time period of all that she witnessed in her life. Technological advancements, war, right on down. Yeah. 3 major wars, you're right.
A couple of things.
Yes.
I don't know if you know of any other people other women who may have run boarding houses.
Yeah, so other women kind of like Julia in the time period. So here's the thing that I've come to learn. I'm sure they existed. Some maybe just weren't as vocal as Julia or then written about like Julia was. So we have the resources to back that up, which is helpful. But also something to consider, women often ran boarding houses. That was well within that was a pink collar job. Right, that was under the purview of domestic work, so it was okay for women to run boarding houses. What made it more unique for Julia is that it was in her name, in ownership, right, when she purchased it. And so that's when things get fuzzy, and you have to dive through the records and consider how state laws varied, how county laws varied on property ownership. And so for Julia, a lot of times property was solely in her name, but sometimes when she wanted to sell something, you'd see her husband's name crop up. So clearly at times there was a stipulation where she needed that second signature. Yeah.
One more observation. The wires that you showed in the photograph of the square in the early days, and I've picked this up from Kevin Frazier, and any of you who have taken Leadership Asheville for seniors have heard Kevin talk about the history of Asheville. But I think to put all that in perspective and the times that Julia Wolfe was living, Asheville was the second largest city in North Carolina at that time. The 20s were a real boom period, and it was also the second city in the country to have electric trolleys.
It was, yes.
And here's a little bit of a UNCA connection, because the gentleman who started with a dam on the French Broad River to power the electric trolley systems was named W.T. Weaver.
Yes. That hits close to home.
Thanks. Comment and a question. I'm glad you mentioned the pink collar piece. I had forgotten all about that. Seems to me within the last year, Malaprops had an author reading of a book the woman had done relative to the role of women in the early part of the 20th century and late 19th century, pardon me, in terms of how that was a niche for them to provide a way of getting ahead and developing a professional identity for themselves. So again, I don't know the title of the author, but it's out there if you want to find it, I'm sure.
I think I know what you're well, there are a couple books that come to mind talking about that, and forgive me for not being able to think of the name of one, but one actually features Julia. She did some research on site, digging through the archives, kind of talking about entrepreneurial women. Do you know who I'm talking about? Forgive me. I'll think of it tonight in the shower or something randomly, but yeah.
Yeah, I have the same problem.
It happens.
It only gets better as you get older. I can tell you about that later. So the question is, you perhaps have some plans for the future for the home that you've kind of got on the kind of back drawing board. And the second part of that question is, Given your state relationship, what role, let us call kindly, does the state have in terms of determining that or cooperating with you on that?
Right. So we are afforded a certain level of freedom and flexibility with our choices as long as the site is maintained and we meet our mission statement. And our mission statement is fairly broad and a little wordy, which is nice, gives us some wiggle room there for different interpretation. But I want to preface that too by saying a lot of what we seek to do, we could not do without the help of our Friends Group. The Thomas Wolfe Memorial Advisory Committee, our Friends Group, is what lets us dive deeply into our special programs. They fund our gift shop, so revenue from that helps fund special programs like the student writing competition that I mentioned. Anytime we need to do an honorarium for a guest speaker, if exhibit costs for some of the pop-up exhibits we like to do, all of that's going to come from our Friends Group. So really, I have found that one could not exist without the other, right? The state gives us that strong backbone we need because we got the downtown location, which would be gobbled up quickly by deep pockets. They also pay for full-time state employee salaries as you know, someone who works at the memorial. I do appreciate that. But when it comes to what I think of as the fun stuff, the things that sometimes matter in the little ways with community outreach, that's our Friends Group, hands down. So they're the ones that really spearheaded the grant with the Preservation Society that allowed us to upgrade the AV equipment, which in theory we could do through the State Avenue, but that would frankly could take years by the time the budget comes down and is approved on those things. So kind of working in tandem. It's a little bit of a unique dance sometimes, right? But we make it work. Yeah, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you all so much for coming. I don't know if I'm standing in the right spot for the camera, but thank you to all of you who joined us from home, and keep showing up for these streaming events if you're outside of Asheville or just don't feel like getting out on a beautiful spring evening. But thank you all of you came in person. We'll be back Wednesday, April 23rd, and I'll pull back the curtain and talk about the magic of Thomas Wolfe. So thank you all so much for coming.